back to the Washington Outsider Report on the Coalition Radio. For those newly joining the program, my name is Irina Zuckerman, and I am the editor-in-chief of the Washington Outsider. With us is a guest from Portugal today. His name is João Lemos Esteves. He's a political and security affairs analyst who is also a contributing writer to Total News Agency and to Israel Hayom. And he also in the past lectured comparative law at the University of Lisbon. We'll be discussing today a very controversial topic, the triumvirate of Iran, Russia, and China and their activities in Portugal and Europe, and what that means for anybody trying to expose them, the economic activity, the investment activity, their propaganda activity, and their political manipulations. João, thank you so much for joining us today, and I'm sure it's been a difficult time for you trying to discuss these topics. But before we get into the meat of the discussion, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got involved in all of this?
Yes, sure. Hi, Irina. It's a great pleasure to be with you and all your audience. Great salute to the United States and the great American people and the American viewers, and all over the world. I know that you have a large audience. You are really a global charter, so it's a great pleasure and honor to be with all of you. Well, I started at a very early age writing and for Portuguese media outlets. First at the local level, like regional, like the county, if you like, a paper and radio station. And then when I was 19 years old, I started collaborating with major Portuguese media outlets. The one which is historical, called Expresso. I would say the biggest and the most influential media outlet in Portugal. And first, with a focus on the domestic politics, the partisan system, the ongoing events at the Portuguese level, and then I evolved for a more international approach. So in the last years, I did more focus on international affairs and national security and global security affairs. Meanwhile, at the same time, I studied law at the Lisbon Law School, and my childish dream was to become a professor of law. When I was 12 years old, I dreamed about. I've dreamt all of my life. I have the dream of becoming a lecturer and a researcher on constitutional law. So my real passion, life passion, was constitutionalism, the constitutional process, how to draft the Constitution, and especially the Constitution of the United States of America. I study for that. I try hard to become a law professor, but things have changed. I was not expecting such a political lead and these very not favorable context right now. In terms of international affairs, I always dedicated much of my attention to the United States and to Israel, and how Israel and the United States impact and they were received or embraced or not embraced so favorably within the European Union and the European Union and Europe in general context. This political heat And this confrontation became pretty much due to my writings, and I think for my determination to defend the Western values. I mean, not in the context or with the aim of a clash of the civilizations or something like that, but to defend democracy, especially freedom, freedom, democracy, the liberal democracy, and against these new authoritarian threats that come pretty much from this block that I've been writing about the emergency of this block, anti-freedom, anti-democracy bloc represented by China, Russia, and Iran since at least 2012. For me, it was pretty obvious that a new reality was being boiled, and we need to pay much attention. And I pretty much I got the feeling that we were not doing enough to counter the emergency of this block, and now we are seeing the repercussions of that inaction, and so I saw firsthand in Portugal how Russia, Iran, and China were cooperating and using Portugal as a lab to test and to design a new way to counter the United States, to make a real opposition to the United States and to defy the Western world and the global order, liberal order that we're part of. So that is pretty much how everything started, and I fight back, obviously, and here we are.
And you live in Oporto. Could you tell us a little bit more for those who are not familiar with Portugal beyond Lisbon?
Okay. So yeah, I was a professor. I studied and I lecture at the University of Lisbon. So I used to live in Lisbon, but I'm a guy from the north of Portugal, which I believe is the soul of Portugal, and Oporto and all the region of the north of Portugal is very vibrant. There's a lot of people here that are able to fight for freedom, that are freedom lovers. In Oporto, you can find many interesting things. It's I would say that is a more there's a lot of similarities within the Galicia and that part of Spain. People are very outspoken. People are very kind. They are very good hosts if you want to come. So you'll find the wineries, how the Douro River, and you can find a very wide cultural program. So I think is definitely worth to visit besides Lisbon. Unfortunately, there's that perception that Portugal is Lisbon, and politically also, unfortunately, Portugal is pretty much Lisbon. So there's a lot of concentration of political power, economic power in Lisbon. But now I think things are starting to change, and I would say that Porto, Aveiro, and Braga are hot spots for you to visit, and you will love even more than other parts of the country.
So Portugal is not a big country, and it's not exactly on the front lines of daily pages most of the time. Nobody thinks of Portugal as a hotbed of controversial political activity? How did it become a base for all these states? You always hear about them in France, in Spain, and Italy, but not so much in Germany, of course, but not so much Portugal. So why did they choose Portugal as a base of operations, and how did this happen that nobody even noticed?
Yes, you're definitely right. Portugal is not the major topic, the trendy topic on international news. Is often disregarded. Uh, you cannot know a lot of things reading the international media outlets, even on a daily basis. Even if you are a very political lover, if you are very engaged in these political or international things, international security things, you cannot find very information about Portugal on the mainstream, on the regular sources of information on a regular basis. But I think Portugal is becoming, and this is not a reality that came out of the blue or something new or something new. I think that it's a long process. Um, and Portugal is, you definitely right, Portugal is a major place, major spot for these anti-freedom, anti-democracy to regimes and forces to be set up to use Portugal is being used as an operational center, and partially that is an effect of the disregard that Portugal suffer from the international attention. Because you look at Portugal, Portugal is a small country, is a poor country, as a weak civil society. So you don't care a lot about this country because you think that geopolitically or in terms of the big players, the big issues at stake at the international level are not taking place in Portugal. In such a small country, you would prefer to center your attention in Spain, in France, or in Germany. But the enemies know that. The enemies of the United States, of Israel, know that Portugal is a small country that are not the main focus of these international powers. So, and that is why one of the reasons why in Portugal, Portugal is seen as a good place to to settle down and to prepare and to be used as an operational center by Iran, China, and Russia. Secondly, do not forget that Portugal used to be an empire, was an empire until 1974. So, we had Portugal had until 1974 a dictatorship, and then Portugal had a transitional period dominated by the Communist Party, and the Communist Party is still very influential in Portugal politics, even today, even to this day, and so the Soviet Union, the Cold War was played front and center in Portugal, and the Soviet Union used Portuguese assets and Portuguese colonies to try to advance their cause. So the communists, the Soviet forces infiltrated and were very active in the Portuguese colonies, African colonies of Angola, Mozambique, Guinea, etc. So Russia had historical and network and knowledge on the ground about these countries. The Soviet Union were the main sponsors of the emerged regimes after the decolonization of these countries towards or relatively to Portugal. And so Russia is a network, historical network, very active with a lot of knowledge about Portugal and about these colonies. So Russia never give up, has never really given up on the major intelligence structures, intelligence methods that they have in Portugal vis-a-vis Portugal, Africa, and South Latin America, especially Brazil. Portugal and Brazil have a strong relationship. Brazilian and Portuguese people have have strong ties. So Portugal is important. Russia has this structure that can be used today as a way to get to Africa, to get to Latin America, and also to European Union. A diplomat from a country from the Latin America once told me that he was looking all the time to see if he was being stalked by a Russian agent, because he knows that Russia are disseminated in Portuguese society, and even in people that you don't know straight ahead that that guy belongs to a Russian intelligence service. They are very disguised. So it's very hard, even hard to identify. So this diplomat told me that Russia is very active. Russia holds real power in Portugal. But now the situation is even more complicated because, as I told you before, Portugal, not only Russia, but Portugal is used as a lab to define and experience and even calibrate these anti-Western, anti-democracy, anti-freedom front, because China and Iran have long taken advantage of this Russian structure, intelligence, logistic structure, knowledge, assets structure, in order to advance their interests in Portugal. So what we are seeing is that Russia is more, is more working from behind, but the more so is very much using the old-fashioned methods, and now we are seeing the emergence of China influence in Portugal, even in the political process, even in the decision making, the legislative political decision making processes, and Iran with the violence, with mechanisms, with the economic warfare, and they work in tandem. They work together, not just with a separate agenda, but they work together. So it's very common, for example, that Iran is very active in Portugal through the startups. Iran is trying to control and taking the lead of the startup incubators in Portugal, the startup landscape in Portugal, and also the venture capital. So it's very common that in these startups or in venture capitals that are used by Iran, by Iranian regime assets, you can find a guy from a partner from China and from Moscow, from Russia, which means that even in the context of the micro landscape, the micro reality that is a startup company, you have Iran dominating, usually with experts from universities, usually from cultural landscape, from cultural realities, and you have then the Chinese and Russia, Russia, I think, brings the expertise in terms of knowing how Portugal works, how historically how Portugal makes the bridge with the African countries or some other realities, and the Chinese brings the money. So it brings the money, and for example, in Portugal, it's very hard for you to criticize China, the Chinese Communist Party, because why? Because China, China managed to hold a major influence, a major role on the main Portuguese media outlets. So the Portuguese media outlets are very dependent on China, on China capital, on China favors. So it's very hard if you try to criticize China, or if you ever try to express a hard stance against China, you are immediately persecuted, shut down, or something like that. So the money that China brings it's not only a question of economic dominance, because the economic dominance played by China then interferes with the democratic the exercise of individual liberties and fundamental rights. It endangers democracy, because if you have the media doesn't let you to express your concerns, your criticism, because of financial calculations, then democracy is not working, right? So that's and then there's another cause, because then if you control the media, the government wants to be on the good spotlight with the media, wants to be on the right side of the media and the main media, and so then the government tends to be very favorable to China, to Chinese interests. And then you have like what I call the collusion, China and the governments, the national government, which then Chinese lobby the government to persecute, to suppress free speech, and to persecute the critics of the Chinese regime. So we have in Portugal, you have this dark scenario, very worrying trend, that is this coalition of this power. And why? Because first, the historical background of Russia. Remember that Putin once told publicly that to a journalist that the Portuguese and Russian societies have a lot in common, because Putin was referring to the illiberal tradition of Portuguese people, because Putin mentioned, and historically is accurate, that Portugal was an absolute monarchy during centuries, and then the liberals were very turbulent, very chaotic, and then you have a republic which was not quite democratic, quite liberal, and then you have the fascist, a fascist regime, or almost fascist regime, at least an authoritarian regime. So Putin was insinuating that that even in European countries, in people from Europe, from Western Europe, democracy was not inevitable. That was not something natural. Because look at Portugal. There's a no traditional legacy and culture. And for example, the Portuguese dictator Salazar some friends from Russia who are anti-Putin told me that Putin read Antonio Salazar's speeches to forge his political thought and his political to be influenced by political action. I don't know if it's quite right, but it's true that he mentioned that there is a that used Portugal to show that not only European countries see democracy or liberal democracy as inevitable. Second, do not forget that, as I told you before, the Chinese Communist Party is very strong, is influential. Even when they have low electoral scores, they can manage to have a significant political role due to their presence within the state, at the state apparatus. So the public, the so-called public employees, the trade unions, and so forth. Third, the fact of Portugal not being an outline, right, not to be always on the news, is a discrete country, which allows them to work more freely, with more discretion, and that's good, and that's good for their strategies. Fourth, the economic and social crisis that Portugal have to face, like Greece, or in a lesser extent Spain. So the economic and social crisis led the way, paved the way for a more decisive intervention of these anti-democracy countries, this anti-Western bloc, anti-NATO bloc within Portuguese borders, to allowing them to leverage their role in terms of economic and political power. And finally, important thing, after all, Portugal, the Portuguese universities and the Portuguese research ID, the investigation and research, the research and development are strong, and so they can take easily by infiltrating at universities, at these research centers. They can get knowledge, to absorb the knowledge and to import to their countries. So in all these factors together make that Portugal is seen by this bloc as strategically to counter the United States, to counter the United States led, the NATO, whatever you want to call it.
So I'm seeing a few interesting things that seem to contradict common perception of these actors. The first is that the Iranian propaganda machinery, it's generally affiliated with academic and think tank circles. In the United States, for instance, there's an entire lobby, but people forget that the lobbyists who are engaged in that activity also have full-time jobs, and many of them are heads of big companies, and they're involved in economics and trade in the US just as much as in lobbying and propaganda. Now we are discovering that there is another angle to all of this, which is Iran's engagement in startup, in high-tech activity. How do they use this investment in startups to further their image, and why hasn't it been more highlighted? We know all about RGC terrorists, trying to assassinate Israelis or opposition in throughout Europe. We don't really know much about their economic impact, especially in areas that we don't really associate with Iran. We think of Iran as a poor, corrupt country that sells pistachios, oil and terrorism. But How are these networks? Is the primary function of these investments self-funding and operations? Is it more propaganda? What is the purpose of their involvement in that sector?
Yeah. Yeah. So first, let me just add one additional note. That is, Portugal is not very is not very focused on international media, but even within our borders, within our Portuguese borders, the media does not refer much to this problem of Iran emergence or Chinese emergence. And Iran, when you have a negative news about Iran in Portugal or Iran in some neighbor of Portugal, even in north of Africa, the news is suppressed, is immediately suppressed, because Iran do not want you to know what Iran is doing. Uh, so the news about Iran is like is every time about Iranian efforts countering terrorism against ISIS, against Daesh. So Iran is leading the fight against terrorism, against ISIS, and Iran is a Persian country with a long history and a marvelous history. That's what people, the majority of Portuguese people get it. So it's not always the international media outlets, it's not the international decision makers or the international politicians that do not see Portugal as a real threat or something that they must take care much attention on, but even the Portuguese people do not fully understand the real repercussions, the real involvement of Iran and the Iranian regime within their country. And if you say otherwise, as we try to do, is fake news, you are a lunatic. It's impossible that Iran wants to be in Portugal. It's impossible, because they create this narrative that Portugal is so small that no one wants to care about the country. So it's impossible that some guys from the Persian from Tehran wants to be here and to have a significant role in Portugal. And so, and that is why you mentioned a very important aspect. That is, Iran in Portugal, they enter as well by culture, by cultural organization, cultural purposes.
Mhm.
So, for example, I think one of the most symbolic agreements between Portugal and Iran was about culture. And the news that you can find in the major of Portuguese news outlets is Iranian cultural work. For example, the Iranian ambassador Morteza Damapak Jami is always portrayed in the media, going to the cultural site of Portuguese, where like a national archive called Torre do Tombo, the Tombo Tower, to read papers about Iranian presence in Portugal since the century, more than 500 years ago, that Portugal and Iran were very close historically. So that's that kind of, and then of course the Iranian presence and the Iranian importance to in terms of Islamic cultural studies, that Iran is vital for uniting the Muslim world. So every peace process must count on Iran, because Iran is the real alliance, represents the real alliance of civilizations. That's what, and so you have Iran is present in Portugal precisely with the cover up of Islamic cultural associations, and legally they have the form of NGOs, no governmental organizations. And so, and that is why they infiltrate universities. So they infiltrate universities, especially linked to cultural organizations, cultural associations, but also in media through these cultural organizations. But now the situation is that these cultural organizations also gather intelligence, gather knowledge in order to develop the other phase of the process, which is precisely develop the artificial intelligence startup sector. Uh, in Portugal, for example, this cultural Islamic association is linked directly to Tehran and to Alu Bayt World Assembly, which is controlled by the Ayatollah Khamenei directly, and it is a platform for spreading internationally the Iranian propaganda to gather intelligence, people, especially young people, political leaders, academic references, top of the university, as of the universities, and so on, to bring them together to the Iranian cause, the international cause, to defend Iranian regime, the Iranian perspective, to spread their fake narratives, and then, but also to monitor people of interest to Iran, critics of the Iranian regime, to adapt tactics of warfare. Warfare is very interesting because, for example, in one of these NGOs, the so-called Islamic Cultural Association, Al Bayt, they hold the so-called seminars to defend the Sahed, the martyr Qasem Soleimani. And in these initiatives, these conferences, they threaten many officials, including the United States official. In Portugal, it's very common in these initiatives to threaten President Trump, Mike Pompeo. Mike Pompeo is a target in these initiatives.
And that's allowed under the law to basically incite violence or to threaten foreign officials?
Well, Irina, the Iranian ambassador in Portugal, published a video with the Israel map, and then the remarks from Qasem Soleimani saying why the Zionist regime will fall and how, why and how. And then in the in the very final of this video, you see the Israel map to be burned down. You heard an explosion, and Israel disappears, and then Palestine state emerges from the down the earth. And then with the great, you see the great Palestine flag replacing Israel. And this was the Iranian ambassador who shares this video on Twitter. You can see on his Twitter page, you can see this video. And nobody, absolutely nobody, says anything. On the contrary, you see that even people, important people from Portugal, share the video. So, I think the authorities do not care about this. And so you see Mike Pompeo, they threaten Mike Pompeo, they threaten President Trump, they threaten Boris Johnson, the UK, former UK Prime Minister, and that is usual. So in this kind of initiative. And so, and then how they collect information. You see that these people that are relevant in these organizations then are also working in these startups. Even when the official curricula their curricula vitae, the CV, says that they are philosophers, they are, experts in theology or something like that. But then they appear in startups working with artificial intelligence and working with reverse metadata and things like that. Because why? Because the aim of this organization is to gather intelligence, is to gather to recruit people to spread the Iranian regime's message. Look, even now with the protests, the huge protests in Iran, you don't see enough coverage of Iranian negative coverage or about the Iranian regime. What you see is that Iranian regime should treat women better, or Iranian regime abolish the morals police. So that's so it's like we are dealing with a normal standard play by the rules regime, not a theocratical authoritarian barbarian regime that the Iranian regime is. And then the artificial intelligence and the startups are also a way to monitor the opponent of the regime and to engage in real unconventional warfare against the whoever defies, whoever criticizes the Iranian regime. For example, besides threatening Mike Pompeo and American citizens, Portuguese citizens, British citizens, what in these events, in these associations, is very common for you to see that they they kind of try to say that we have a lot to learn from Qasem Soleimani. There is one of the main collaborators with the Iranian regime in Portugal, who had in the past a formal connection with the Portuguese state, even with the intelligence service, said publicly, or almost publicly, that we must learn and apply the unconventional warfare rules by Qasem Soleimani. So, and this unconventional warfare is lawfare, the use of judicial system to persecute critics of Iran, to collect private data from the critics of the Iranian regime, even information that theoretically were supposed to be secret, were supposed to be private, and just the Portuguese state that we shared only with the Portuguese state. I found that some information, for example, on me, that just the Portuguese state could have access to that information was in the Iranian regime hands in Portugal. But also to monitor and to monitor your private conversations, your cell phone, your WhatsApp, your applications. Why? And these artificial intelligence startups are being used to this political espionage, because this is espionage by the Iranian regime, and it's very it's very easy to make the link between these startups and the Iranian regime, because in the middle you can find these NGOs that are openly linked to the Iran regime. For example, Alubayt World Assembly was a company. It's a company. It's an NGO, not a company. Well, it's actually is a company, but as this organization was registered in the past they were registered in the United States and in Canada. In the United States, in Maryland, they are no longer active because of their connections with the Iranian regime. In Canada, the equivalent of the IRS revoke the Alawite World Assembly status as an NGO precisely because of its ties with the Iranian regime, with Tehran regime. In Portugal, they are pretty much open. They work, they do whatever they want, and that's no problem. On the contrary, apparently they can have access to information that supposedly were exclusive to the Portuguese state. They use, for example, one of these Iranian collaborator accents, whatever you want to call them, they openly say that they use a system called Python to monitor to hack Iranian opponents, Iranian critics, and so they use this system so that they can fish your WhatsApp messages, and but also monitor your calls, for example, in real time. So it's a major threat, and they are colonizing. They are taking over these startups, these artificial intelligence, life sciences, and life science is very important. Why? Because the regime, and this is a coalition, China, Iran. Because if you dominate the life sciences industry, you get a lot of information, a lot of data regarding the people, right? People's health, how they react, how that's very valuable data, economic, political, and socially, and you can design, draft a profile of people to better get to them, and so and that is vital. These information society, communication society is vital for advancing your geopolitical interests. So in this profile, in this profile, in these startups and cultural association, you find people that are very connected with IT, aeronautics, civil engineering. But basically IT, information and technology, artificial intelligence is where Iranian is betting, is very high in Portugal. Of course, Irina, just one note. Of course, that Al-Bayt is linked to the Iranian regime, but it's very important. It's a cover-up for the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. And in Portugal, at least, there is one of the biggest guys from the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps is always on transit between Portugal, Lisbon, and Lahore, Pakistan, with a direct connection with the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps in Mashhad in Iran. So we're talking about these startups, these associations, these think tanks are meant for giving material, economic, intellectual, intelligence support for the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. We're talking about intelligent unit, right? Not just a metaphysical connection or political or ideological connection with with the Iranian regime. We're talking about intelligence unit, military, also military presence in Portugal, and that's directly about Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps presence in Portugal, not just some low rank department from the Iranian regime. We talk about big fish.
So there is a direct structural connection between the cultural organizations and the tech world, the startups, these economic groups. And you are saying that all of this is towards this activity, lawfare, attacks on critics of the regime in Portugal. But do the victims of this espionage and surveillance, illegal surveillance, do they not file lawsuits or take legal action with the law enforcement in Portugal? What is the public reaction, especially from critics?
First, there's no public pressure on Iran. You can pretty much say anything about Iranian presence in Portugal because you will immediately be silenced, called as a deranged person. The usual playbook. The playbook they use in the United States, they use in Spain, they use in France, and they use in Portugal. In Portugal is more severe because in the United States you have a lot of competition, you have a freedom to there's a country where freedom is very enshrined in the people life, in the culture, in the American culture, and you can easily create a media, a podcast, and have a large audience, right? Even in European countries like Germany or France, Spain, you have a lot of people. There are big countries. The civil society is relatively dynamic. In Portugal, no. In Portugal, it's very centralized. There's a limited number of media outlets. There's so the system is so centralized that if you say something about Iran, you will there's a journalist to say that you're crazy, and then they shut down. The prime minister called to the director of the journal of the media outlet and say, "Oh, fire this guy! He's undermining Portuguese interests." And the director of the newspaper will fire. That's it. So, so the perception, the people's perception about the Iranian presence in Portugal is second to none. Second to none. People do not have that perception. The majority of people, Portuguese people, do not have any knowledge of that. So they cannot act accordingly. In fact, a political scientist wrote to me on like a week ago that Iran is not even an issue in Portugal because 99% of Portuguese people do not know anything about Iran, doesn't care about Iran. So for politicians, it's not worth to discuss Iran because Iran is nothing. So it's better to be on Iran's right side than on the wrong side because politically people do not care, and economically it's better to be on the right side of Iran. So that's the general landscape, the general frame that you in terms of the public perception. Second, for example, I was attacked by these bots, this Emir campaign put out by the Iranian regime, and the advice that I received was to be silent. I mean, to do nothing about Iran, because if I if I say something to the law enforcement or some Portuguese authority agency, it would backfire against me. So the information that I had, this advice from a top 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 staffer Portuguese, let's call this way, of the Portuguese government, was not say anything because it would be backfire, or they would turn the lawsuit against me instead of protecting me, would put against me for for libel or something like that. I mean, they wouldn't make up something. Iranian regime would make up something, and second, the information would be compromised. So, and that is what I think is more difficult, more complicated to understand, and more dangerous. Is that some information that we can give to a state might end up in the Iranian regime's actually. So so there's no lawsuits, there's no knowledge, there's a completely cover up of the Iranian regime. If you try to say otherwise, they will put a reputation campaign to damage your reputation, to attack, to threaten you and your family, and so and people think that it's not worth, right? It's not worth to take the risk.
Now, you mentioned earlier that Russians and Chinese are often working in conjunction in some of these companies. To what extent does Russia provide know-how and training for the Iranians? And to what is the type of collaboration you can see between them?
Well, the type of collaboration, I think Russia is the real deal. I think in terms of the intelligence unit, in terms of intelligence, in terms of effective intelligence work, I think the Russian have the upper hand in Portugal. I think they have the know-how, they have the capacity, they have the resources, they have the experience that make the largest, I would say, the largest intelligence presence in Portugal. The base, intelligence unit, intelligence base is far larger than any, even compared with the Chinese or the Iranians. I think the Russians, so they give this operational comfort, this operational ground to the Chinese and to Iran. I think the Chinese are more focused on the money to identify the right targets, the right assets in the political parties, in the political system, and then to use the money to advance their interests. The Chinese, they recruit in Portugal. I mean, for example, in terms of intelligence, they identify some former intelligence officer, some former politician who is influential today near the sitting government, and they hire them to be their representative, to be their intelligence director in Portugal, the director of operations, and also the Chinese then spread a lot. They create a lot of organizations so that they cannot be identified with one single organization. I mean, for example, instead of like the Russians, instead of bring their own people to handle intelligence matters, they create like 20, 30 cultural organizations, not political, cultural organizations, like the Friends of the Silk Road, the or One Belt, One Road entrepreneurs, something like that. The Portuguese-Chinese League. And then they put the right people, they distribute the right people amongst this list of organizations, and they collect intel and they promote their interests from this point of view, using these apparatus. So it's very common that influential people you can find in these organizations created by Chinese, but are Portuguese. So formally, it's a Portuguese citizens that create the organization, and China does not have any direct or formal connection with them. But it's a way of getting intel. It's a way of dominate and shape the political discourse. And then the money, economic power. The Chinese is the man of the bed, right? It's the man of the money. The man who pays the bill in the end of the lunch. The man of the wallet. And then the Iranian. Then the Iranian is more, I think, is more nowadays more sophisticated, but more lethal in a way. But so Chinese and Russia. Russia, I think, is more on the back nowadays. Is working from behind, letting Chinese and Iran to go ahead, and Russia stays on behind, relaxing, but always having the control of the structure.
Speaking of the structure, we know that Spain has been targeted by Russian campaigns, the funding of the separatism movement in Catalonia. We've seen propaganda attacks on Greece as well. Greece is a major growing economically important energy target for a number of investing countries. And Russia seems to be connected to a lot of this activity. Is there a connection between their presence to Portugal and their ability to infiltrate and attack and use propaganda and funding for these events on the neighboring European countries?
Of course, in Portugal, there was recently an attack to NATO, to the Ministry of Defense of Portugal, and they got access to NATO's documents, and they leaked to on the dark web. In fact, the leak of the documents were before there were reports about the documents from NATO being leaked on the dark web, whose origin was Portugal and Italy before that attack. But yes, but that's a very the attacks are a real reality. For example, even myself, I suffer cyber attacks all the time. And the origin is these groups of Iranians, but the source analyzing the malware, the source is Moscow. So you can trace the origin to Moscow, to Russia. So which means that this cooperation in terms of the structure, the operational, the economic, and in terms of content to be spread on the internet. But yes, but in terms of energy, so Russia is obviously, because KGB and the KGB is better than the Chinese intel services, and the experience of KGB makes that the FSB and the group, the Military Intelligence Services, the GRU, are better than Chinese and far better than the Iranian intel services. Because in terms of intelligence, in terms of risk, to identify risk threats, to identify in terms of preemptive information, preemptive intel, you see that the Iranian, even the IRGC, have some major flaws. You can see, and you can see that if not the Russians, they were even worse than they are. So in terms of operational, the background, the experience, the knowledge of the KGB, the old KGB, makes in the end of the day the difference. And I have no doubt that Russia is behind these capability, these attacks, because they have the capability, they have the knowledge, and they have activists who they attract, and they have one thing very important. They have Edward Snowden, and Snowden is one thing. One thing that I discover is that these groups of artificial intelligence that operates with Iran for the Iranian regime and are owned by the Iranian regime. Some of them are have at some moment, at some point, some contact with Edward Snowden. So Edward Snowden, people, even in the United States, sometimes tend to downplay Edward Snowden's role and the danger of Edward Snowden. But Edward Snowden will be a major threat to the United States, and will be even more in the future, a major threat to the United States security, to the free world security. It is not a coincidence that Putin granted Edward Snowden the Russian citizenship during the war against Ukraine. It's a sign that Snowden is being considered by the Russian regime a key instrument to undermine, to confront the United States and the democracy and the democracies, the Western democracies and liberal states. And Edward Snowden, you see some patterns in the way they move, the way they work, that are very similar to the things, the modus operandi adopted or advocated by Edward Snowden. Even some media outlets, for example, Al Jazeera. I think it's obvious that Al Jazeera is benefiting from Edward Snowden. That the source of Al Jazeera in many topics is Snowden or people affiliated with Snowden, because Snowden is not some lonely guy. Snowden have a network, and they use his network to promote Russia the agenda of the United States, anti-United States countries and regimes, and is being very effective in doing so. So I have no doubt that Russia is behind the cyber attacks, but Iranian in a different way. I do not think that Iranian have the capacity, for example, to attack a major United States governmental organization or agency. The Russians have, Iran do not have, but they can target individuals, they can target journalists in a more effective way than Russia does. So Russia is for the big things, or to cause the disruption, chaos, and the Iranian is to target like fatwas, right? To be specific, to be on a daily approach, and so yeah. So, but Russia is, I think, in terms of operational, in terms of capacity to provoke real chaos, Russia is the real threat.
Would it be fair to say that Snowden, who is reportedly behind part of the team developing cryptocurrency that was used to fund the Catalonian secessionist movement, is also part of the whatever funding is going on to the separatists and the Russian propagandists in Ukraine.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point, Irina. And I forgot to mention that these startups in Portugal that are linked to the Iranian regime also work in cryptocurrency, bitcoins, and so on. The new digital methods of payment. So they are very engaged in cryptocurrencies. Which means that Iran, a source of funding, Iran especially the IRGC operations is by these digital methods of funding, right? No doubt that cryptocurrencies are financing the destabilization activity of Russia in Catalonia, to fund the Polisario Front in Sahara, and no doubt about it. It is a major way for Russia to fund these activities, and also, or especially, the war against Ukraine. That is not a coincidence that Iran now and Russia are very engaged, and they created a partnership, right? So they are together in the aggression, in the war against Ukraine, because what you are seeing in Ukraine, you could see that before in Spain, in Catalonia, in Portugal, the Russians and Iranians working together. For example, the content, the messages that this Iranian link, channels, TV, like Hispan TV in Spain, even though they are owned by Iranian, the message is fabricated by Russia. And for example, in Portugal, you see that the message that these bots, these artificial intelligence, spread are the Russians' propaganda message. So Russia also use these channels to promote their propaganda, which means that they are front nowadays. They're no longer acting separately in a separate way, but they are working together as a united front. In Portugal, for example, in Spain, most of these activists came from Podemos, a fringe from the Partido Socialista Obrero, the Socialist Party, but most of them came from Podemos. In Portugal, is from the Communist Party, or the left bloc, but especially from the communists. The Communist Party is more, the activists are more violent. They can say, we'll break your face, or something like that. And it's acceptable. You can say that. But what is interesting is that they never defend one country, only one country. They defend where the message is Russia, China, Iran, and then they put Belarus, Syria, Lebanon against Lebanon. Most of them do not refer Lebanon. They put Hezbollah against the Western world, against the United States. For example, most of these artificial intelligence, or what they call the Butt Factory, use the code down with the USA. Down the USA, that is the message painting on the world United States embassy. building in Tehran that now is fighting with the Khomeini. So they have the message down with the USA. That's the code used by this group to identify one another is by putting down with the USA the message painting in Tehran.
And you also mentioned that China has been the money, the bagman of this coalition. Are there any strategic targets in Portugal that China has been particularly keen on purchasing or investing in?
Yes, energy, health sciences, or health industry, health services, insurance, financial system. But the priority is energy, like the Iranians. The Iranians, one of the reasons Iran is so focused on Portugal is energy, especially renewable energy and green hydrogen. Iran is very, very keen on getting control over Portuguese green hydrogen industry, especially now that with the connection Portugal Rotterdam in Netherlands. Netherlands, which is also a hot spot for the Iranian regime. Iran is very present there. And so if you see the official the Iranian embassy in Portugal officials, they in a subtle way, in a very, very discreet way, they always mention the question of the green hydrogen. They are subtle, but not so subtle. So we can identify that Iran is betting high on controlling the green hydrogen in Portugal. And also a big question is the seaport of Sines. The seaport of Sines is a seaport which is strategical to connect the United States and Europe, and to the navigation in the Atlantic, linking the North Atlantic and the South Atlantic, and the Mediterranean, the access to the Mediterranean. And China has identified Port of Sines as a strategic asset for them. They are pressure the Portuguese government. They have been pressuring the Portuguese government for quite a while to give the control of seaport to them. China wants to have control over the seaport of Sines, especially now with the Russia, when Europe is trying to be less dependent on Russia energy sources. The United States, the port of Sines is a port of entry for the oil, for the shale gas to get from the United States to get into Europe. So also in terms of the connections, because there are the fibers, the cables to connect Fortaleza and Portugal, in terms of intelligence, in terms of data, in terms of communications, sensitive communication is vital for NATO as well. And so giving the seaport of Sines to the Chinese is a major threat, not only for Portugal, not only for NATO, but for the United States, because the United States, the Chinese can trap the United States in the future to a very difficult situation, even regarding the South China Sea. So the ambassador, George Glass, the former ambassador, the United States ambassador to Portugal, George Glass, appointed by President Trump, had a very, very hard stance, warning the Portuguese government that they have to choose even if they want to stick with the Chinese, or they want to have the strong partnership based on common values and friendship with the United States. And the government, the Portuguese government, went nuts after that. And the Portuguese government, they spearheaded a smear campaign against the United States ambassador, Mr. George Glass. A public campaign, press campaign, saying that the ambassador George Glass was interfering with the domestic political process, interfering in Portuguese sovereignty issues, and so on. They attacked violently an ambassador in a way that is not usual in Portugal, and I can't. I cannot remember of a similar attack. Maybe I remember when the ambassador appointed by President Bush confronted the socialist government of Portugal back then that they have to stop being the to schmooze, being the lover of Hugo Chavez regime in Venezuela. And I think it was Ambassador Alfred Hoffman, who was also a victim of a smear campaign that ultimately made President Bush appoint a new ambassador to replace him. But what George Glass, when George Glass pointed out that China could not take our lunch, was he had to confront a violent campaign, and pretty much after that, George Glass, the ambassador, decided to keep a low profile. So imagine the violence. But unfortunately, so the United States have to look, and I believe the United States are looking very carefully to this situation, because it's the American national security that is at risk, and NATO security as well.
And that incident, when did it happen?
It happened in September 2020. So 2 months, 2 months away from the U.S. general election, the presidential election. And so go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, what was the Biden's administration's reaction to this issue? Have they followed the same policies, or have they been different?
Well, the truth is that the Portuguese government then calmed down. I mean, after President Trump lost the election, and President Biden won the election and was and took charge, the Portuguese thought that Biden would be more China friendly, and so he would drop that question. But the truth is that President Biden did not let it go. The Biden administration is pressing on the seaport. The ambassador, the current ambassador, Randy Levine, has publicly said that Portugal, we count on Portugal to be our friend, our ally, and a reliable ally. And the word reliable is not innocent, is not by chance. So, and is in every joint statement by Portuguese and American officials, the Port of Sins is mentioned. And so the Biden administration is continuing the Trump administration vision about the seaport of Sines, and identify the risk of Chinese taking over that seaport.
Now, you mentioned that the government is, very friendly to these socialist policies. I imagine it's friendly with socialist regimes such as Venezuela, and probably with leftist counterparts in neighboring countries like Podemos and like that whole the left-wing coalition in Spain. How does that? What does that mean geopolitically? What comes out of these alliances? What role does the Portuguese government play in that sphere?
The Portuguese government is very friendly to Venezuela. I would say that Portugal is the BFF of Venezuela, aside from the Latin American countries and old time failed of Nicolas Maduro and Hugo Chavez. But yes, but the Portuguese government, are very friendly and so they try to engage with the Venezuela government. They support, or at least they tend not to be hostile towards the Chavez or Maduro regime. For example, the Portuguese Prime Minister Antonio Costa welcomed in a very gratefully way Nicolas Maduro in Egypt during the summit on climate change. So you have to visit Portugal. You have to visit Portugal. Oh, like we have to take into account that there is a large Portuguese community in Venezuela. So the reason why they say that they have to get along with the Venezuelan regime is that Portuguese have a large community there, so and we have to protect. But the reason is that one thing is to protect the community. One other very different is to engage with this regime, this violent, autocratic regime, which is the Venezuela dictatorship. There is a lot of the Venezuela relationship with Portugal is a very complicated one. There's a lot of corruption, judicial investigations going on. You know, Paulo Pesqueira Murta was a former major Portuguese bank an employee and was working for the Venezuelan regime directly to conspire against the United States to launder money from drug trafficking, and he is arrested. He's in jail in Texas, in the United States. And there's also concerns that Portugal is being used as a way for the Venezuelan regime to engage in money laundering operations using the Portuguese financial system, especially the Madeira island offshore, there's in Venezuela holds a hand, we have to say, in some political parties, Portuguese political parties, due to some close relationships that were forged some years ago, up to now, up to the present. And one important thing, Venezuela, also is this Venezuela presence in Portugal has to do with the Russian presence in Portugal. For example, the Venezuelan ambassador to Portugal, Lucas Rico Romero, who has been here for more than a decade, which is not usual for an ambassador to stay as long as Rico Romero has been here. But it's very close to Russia. It's very close to Russia, and so Venezuela is a repercussion, or is directly linked. Venezuela grip in Portugal is directly linked to the Russia influence in Portugal. Also, looking at Africa, Don't forget that.
So we are seeing this coalition congregating this group, and I can't imagine it being a coincidence. There's the former leftist party Syriza in Greece has been aligned very much with the same actors, the Russians, the Iranians, the Turks, and others. They're seeing the Spanish parties, same thing, ruling parties. So there is this attempt through propaganda to kind of bring back the leftists to power in Greece by accusing the current government of human rights violations against opposition and so on and so forth. Where do you think this is going strategically? If there is this effort to create this leftist bloc in that area, and in Italy it's failed because the prime minister is very much against Russia, but overall the influences there are still quite strong. If we were to create this Mediterranean pro-Russian bloc, what do you think would be the impact of that?
The impact would be great and unfortunate, right? Or, you mentioned Italy. Italy is a curious case because Italy, yes, the prime minister now she has a stance against Russia and against Iran, but Iran is very powerful in Italy and Russia as well. And Russia and Iran. See that when Iran is strong, Russia is strong, and when Russia is strong, Iran tend to, even if Iran is not so strong, then Iran, lift up its position. Italy is a complicated. Italy is a complicated country because Iran is infiltrated in key positions. I mean, there's a national. I'm trying to measure my words, but there's a national security risk that Italy will have to confront in the near future. Yes, the Mediterranean, I think, is if the leftist platform or there is a leftist bloc in the Mediterranean, the consequences will be enormous. Enormous for world stability, for peace, for democracy, because in the Mediterranean, you play pretty much the stability of the global world order.
And there is more, because Italy and Greece and Cyprus, they're part of this Mediterranean gas kind of coalition.
Yes, yes,
imagine if pro-Russian, pro-Iranian, pro-Chinese political parties gain entry to and gain control and access to all of that energy field.
Yeah.
How do you think that would change the current trajectory of the energy independence efforts by various players?
Yes, it would be undermined, and that's why energy is vital to understand the trends in political order, the geopolitical order. Energy will be the definitive tool, and will unlock and anticipate, define the global trends. And that's why energy is a national security issue. You cannot treat energy as an economic issue. Energy is a national security issue, and that's why now we know that was a mistake when the Nord Stream, when President Biden lifted up the sanctions against the blockade against the construction of the Nord Stream 2 was. We know for a fact and are living the repercussions, the negative repercussion of that decision, because some people would consider that energy is an economic thing. So you can manage like the market or like a commodity, but it is not. Energy is a national security issue. It must be treated like that. And but after all, we have to keep our hope, because I think I think in Spain maybe the no leftist parties can have some wins there, and be like a balance in terms of this in this trend. Portugal, the government is a socialist government. A government, the prime minister curried favor with the communists and the left bloc, the far left parties. Now the prime minister has the Socialist Party as an overall majority, but uh, he's in power. He's been in power like this as a prime minister with an overall majority 1 year ago for a year. So he has 3 more years to go. But the situation, well, is not so stable as one would think of, considering that he has an overall majority. But I think we need to counter that narrative and try that the Mediterranean keeps on the right side and not on the wrong side.
Do you think to that extent then that the funding of these, secessionist movements, this effort to create chaos and scandals and everything else, do you think the ends behind it are as much economic and security as they're simply political power, saber rattling by Russia and its allies? What do you think they're hoping by weakening these countries, by weakening EU, by creating these assorted scandals and political upheavals and changing governments? What type of control are they seeking in the US?
You mean the Chinese, the Russian, and Iran, in
Yes.
terms of the scandal and the targeting of
Yeah, the
political
movements and all these things.
Well, they try to. The magical word for them is chaos. The chaos is the magical word. If you read Alexander Dugin, a thinker who used to be close to Putin, and I think he has like a back channel with Putin still up to this day, and he's the real influencer of Putin's thought. Even though, of course, Putin is a pragmatist, he's a politician. Dugin is a philosopher. So some people say, no, Putin does not follow Dugin because Putin's actions are very different from Dugin's writings. Of course, Putin, one thing is what you write, one thing is what you do. So the reality is never so pure as the theory. But the main philosophy, the main thinking that is in the Putin's head is Alexander Dugin's theory. And if you read the numerous writings by Dugin, there's the word that is common to all of them is chaos, because Dugin look at chaos as the way to pure peoples, to pure states, to purify states, and to bring like some kind of blossom, right? So you have the death, and then you have the blossom, and so they Putin and Dugin see chaos as a way. If they create chaos in the Western country, they will lead to the they will fall the institutions, the values, the society, what they call the deep state will fall, and then you will have the blossom. And the blossom will be like a Russian center or Russian model, a new world order where Russia is the center, or at least holds a vital role. So all this campaign of disinformation, of making the people in the Western countries feel bad about themselves, or do not trust in their values, do not trust in their capacity to solve their own problems, have to do with generating chaos. Because chaos will lead to a ultimate confront, and that confront will collapse the global order from within. Because Russia knows that cannot afford to be at war with the United States directly, cannot afford to be at war with even with the Chinese. So what can Russia do? And economically, Russia is not so strong. So what can Russia do? Disinformation, intelligence, operation. Do not forget that Putin is a guy from the intelligence, the civil intelligence service. So he thinks like an intelligence guy, and that is why something very very interesting. If you look at Portugal, if you look at Italy, if you look at Spain, you will see one common trend. That is the far left and the far right go together. They cooperate.
Mm-hmm.
They have the same mantras. Why? Because what Putin and Iran wants, for example, Iran is funding far left and the far right. Iran has a special love and affection for the neo-Nazis group. One of the reasons that the Alfred Hoffman and then Thomas Stevenson, two former ambassadors of the United States to Portugal, were very controversial as well, like Mr. George Les during President Trump years, was that Stevenson wanted to report to Washington about how Iran was using a neo-Nazi guy in Portugal, the neo-Nazi guy called Mário Machado, to advance, to promote violence, to promote guerrilla against the institution, but especially against NATO. So against NATO and against the United States, and but you see that a common trend is that the far left and the far right work together in order to collapse. They do not have anything in common unless they want to break democracy and these freedom bloc led by the United States. The goal is to tear the United States down. What they call the multipolar world order does not mean anything but replacing the United States by a coalition of countries led by Russia, and then Iran, Belarus, all the enemies of the liberal democratic state. And so you see these. That's why these smear campaigns and so forth is to create chaos. Chaos is the word they strive for.
Now, for the last question, because I know we have taken a lot of your time, what have your efforts to reveal all this? What effects have they had on your life and your career?
Well, it's been hard actually. One of the first of all, in terms of the law school, my career as a lecturer, I think for now, at least in Portugal, it's over because they started a campaign notoriously funded by the Iranian assets in Portugal, using the artificial intelligence startups and what they call the factory of bots They say one of the Iranian experts say that they have in Portugal, working in Portugal, a factory of bots to spread a message and to attack the opponents and criticals of the Iranian regime. They started a campaign to force the university to fire me. Right? But actually they did not succeed how they wanted to succeed, because actually I was warned by a security analyst from a country that was in Portugal. I was advised not to go and to the law school anymore for a time, because there were security threats, security risks, especially and not going to the law school and not walking around the University of Lisbon campus, because there were security threats. And then once again, I was advised not to tell to the Portuguese authorities in order not to compromise the intel, the information, and the Iranian to not wake up Iranian intel forces in Portugal, to put it mildly, right? So I did not go to law school anymore. So I put my lecture career in standoff, and as a law and as a political analyst and the media contributor in Portugal, I don't have anymore, because I cannot publish or write anything in Portugal. That's a total boycott. I can even for I used to write for a newspaper called Nascer do Sol, the wake, the sun, right? The sun, the Portuguese sun. Is not affiliated with the UK. It's total different.
Mhm.
But the director of the newspaper told me that I should not write about Iran, because Iran was very pissed off about my articles, and that when he called me, he told me that the call was being monitored by some guys, and this was much for this got a point where it's not about Portugal any longer. It's far uh, it's further than Portugal. Actually, it's insinuating that Iran was all over it, right? So he proposed I could not write about Iran for at least 1 year. So I have to drop writing about Iran for at least 1 year. Of course, obviously, I did not accept. So I quit writing there, and in Portugal, there's no place to write. So I have to write for Israel Hayom in Israel, and for Total News, which is based in Argentina, but is in the United States, Brazil, and some countries. And at least there is a freedom of speech there.
Well,
I can write what I read.
you can also
Yeah.
add the Washington Outsider to the list.
Sorry.
You can also list. You could add the Washington Outsider to the list. You're welcome to submit articles.
Thank you so much, Irina. Thank you so much. So much. It's great news. And as a consultant, as a lawyer in Portugal, I can do any. In Portugal, there's a total boycott. I can do pretty much nothing, and there's always security concerns. People tell me these because one the security expert that told me not to go to the law school told me about this recording of calls by the. He did not mention Iran expressly, but confirmed that Iran was all over it. So when you connect all the dots, right, you reach to the conclusion that Iran and China are all over it. So in my career, it had tremendous impact on my career, financially, economically, and also the Iranian. I have to. I'm suffering the consequences of the lawfare because they. I'm fighting a real unconventional warfare. The Iranians are applying the unconventional warfare against me because I have these psychological operations because there is a smear campaign, defamation campaign on the internet, on Twitter, etc. They created even comedians, right, to put to undertake this smear campaign. I had economic boycott and the lawfare because I have for my after my writings about Iran, I have a lawsuit, a criminal lawsuit against me was filed by one guy who is acting as pretty much as a straw man for Iran because the whole lawsuit is about Iran and now smear Iran. And the second is a lawfare file is the lawsuit filed by the Prime Minister of Portugal. The Prime Minister of Portugal for damaging, I don't know, it's defamation against the Republic. Defamation against the Republic. For undermining the reputation of the Portuguese Republic regarding the presence of a guy who spreads Russia, Iranian, Chinese propaganda, and and happens to be an official of the Portuguese government, who, by the way, interviewed last week a prominent conspiracy theorist and a spreader of Iranian propaganda and Qatari propaganda, who used to work for Al Jazeera on his YouTube channel, spreading conspiracy theories against the United States, against Israel, and even insinuating that the attack against Salman Rushdie was a plot fabricated by the United States. Imagine. So, and I'm the one who is putting Portuguese Republic at risk, reputation at risk. But here's the thing: when I was teaching at the law school, I received a visit from two guys who work for the presidency of the Council of Ministers, Portuguese Council of Ministers, and they threatened me that if I don't stop writing about China, the focus was China, Russia, and Iran. They nominated the three of them, and if I do not associate, if I don't stop associating these countries with the prime minister, they would destroy my life, putting several lawsuits against me. They would use the courts to go after me. And 1 week after that, the prime minister, Portuguese prime minister, filed the lawsuit because it's a lawsuit, but it's not a civil lawsuit; it's a criminal lawsuit. Because in Portugal, there's a criminal provision to punish defamation, to punish the defamation against republic, defamation against public bodies. Well, there's a lot of crimes regarding freedom of, regarding the speech, right? So it's very easy and affordable and cheap for you to set up a lawfare campaign against someone, because you can say always that defamation against Iran, defamation. And by the way, one important detail: the first lawsuit was filed in April 2021. 2 weeks before that, or 3 weeks before that, the Iranian government summoned the Portuguese ambassador in Tehran and the Iranian government inside the Portuguese government to use the courts to punish those who defy, they use the words who violating the human rights of Iranians, the human rights of Iranians. So the human rights of Iranians is if you attack the Iranian regime. And not by chance in Europe, in Portugal, but also in Spain, you see lawfare against critics of Iran. Juan Carlos Monedero wrote at the same time, Juan Carlos Monedero wrote that it's time for us to put someone in jail to set the example. Juan Carlos Monedero is being investigated in Spain for receiving illegal money from Iran. So it is not a coincidence. You have Twitter groups who are directly connected with the artificial intelligence in Portuguese, Setúbal, district of Setúbal, Lisbon, who are owned by Iranian and with a direct link to the Iranian government. And you have a Portuguese ambassador who is summoned to receive this threat warning from the Iranian government. And then you have Juan Carlos Monedero writing this piece. And then lawsuits then fall off the sky. It's not a coincidence. It's not a coincidence. This proves the risk and the threat, the imminent threat, the actual threat for our liberties, for our constitutional rights that Iran, the Iranian regime represents.
Well, that is absolutely terrible, and it's shocking to hear that this is going on in Europe. To be honest, I haven't been under the illusion that Europe is nearly as human rights or democracy oriented as they claim. We've seen abuses in favor of Iran, of the legal system, hijacking of the legal system in Denmark, in Netherlands, which you mentioned, Sweden and other countries. But Portugal was the last place suspected to be tied into all of this. But as it turns out, things can always get worse. But the one thing that all these regimes have in common, they absolutely hate daylight. And the more light we can shine on their activities and expose all these networks, associations, companies, and so forth, the more difficult we can make it for them. Now they're on the offensive. They feel free to threaten everybody because most people have no idea what's going on. But the more there is scrutiny, the more U.S. government is aware of that, the more there's going to be pressure and exposure, and the more questions there's going to be asked in public as well as behind the scenes.
And there's another thing, Irina, sorry for interrupting you, but I think it's important. The Portuguese government, getting back to cultural, how Iran uses culture as an instrument. The Portuguese government and the Iranian government signed a deal where the political agents, the government officials, or someone who is linked to the Iranian government in some capacity, as long as they use the passport, the official Iranian passport, they can, the Portuguese and the Iranian government sign an agreement that waives any visa restrictions for Iran to enter into Portugal and then enter into the Schengen space. So, for example, as the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps is a political body of the Iranian government, because it's a political institution, so it's very easy. And this cultural, in Iran, you can find many cultural foundations, cultural organizations that the Iranian regime consider part of their organic. So it's very easy for you to give to someone to Iran to an agent of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. You give an official passport, and they can enter into Portugal without a visa, using that visa waiver. So this agreement was signed in 2017, and it's not a coincidence that the Iranian presence in Portugal has intensified since 2017. Maybe they started to be more vocal in 2015, but then starting from 2017, they started to be more present. They started to go big, to invest big in startups, in artificial intelligence, and so on. One note important: this Portugal, the Iranian presence in Portugal is not. They are connected with Spain, but the main bridge is not with Spain; it's with UK, the UK. So what we see is that many Iranian assets from UK are getting into Portugal because UK is no longer a member of the European Union. So Portugal is being instrumental to be in the European Union and making the bridge with the UK. So, for example, I talk about Alubait. Alubait chapter in Portugal officially is the chapter UK chapter. So the initiatives are always organized by in cooperation with London or Birmingham. So the activity and the main focus of these organizations are not only Portugal, but always aimed at the UK. And the same happened regarding the artificial intelligence, the startups that we talked about a few minutes ago. They are in Portugal, but they operate in a large extent in the UK. They study in the UK. They go make their PhDs in the UK. They create companies in the UK, and then they work in cooperation, always with this link UK Portugal.
That's really paradigm shifting, because I think the US media covers only general Iranian activity in Europe, but not the specific transition of the networks. And quite frankly, once somebody is nabbed, once some terrorist is nabbed and sentenced, any news about the networks and the rest of the activity around that terrorist or that group of spies is dead in the media. There's no longer any news as to what happens afterwards with the rest of their connections and facilitators and so forth. So this is very helpful information to know. I hope you'll write more. I hope we'll speak a lot more on the subject in the future, because there's a lot more to discuss. Portugal has been uncovered as a hub of surprising activity. Let's hope that in the future it can revert to being a hub of something more positive than spies and saboteurs. But for the time being, its role has to be properly understood in order to develop effective strategies to respond to all these very much belatedly respond to all these developments. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for joining us. For those watching, this was the Washington Outsider Report on the Coalition Radio. With you, as always, Irina Zuckerman, the editor-in-chief of the Washington Outsider. Please stay tuned next week, 9 p.m. Tuesday, as always. And today we were discussing how Iran, China, and Russia coalition working closely together penetrated in Portugal and turned it into a base of operations for the entire Mediterranean bloc. Thank you so much.
Thank you.